Welcome to a Legendarium special about the Great Sphinx of ancient Egypt. In this episode, we will talk about the construction and restoration of one of ancient Egypt's most iconic monuments. The Great Sphinx of Giza is a colossal limestone statue of a recumbent sphinx located in Egypt, and likely dates from the reign of King Khafre, who reigned from 2603 to 2578 BC. It likely depicts Khafre's face, though some scholars believe Khafre's older brother Jeffrey originally commissioned it. However, several lines of evidence still tie the Great Sphinx to Khafre and his temple complex. Firstly, the head and face of the Sphinx are very similar to a life-size statue of Khafre. Secondly, remnants of a causeway connect the Valley Temple to a mortuary temple next to Khafre's pyramid. Regardless of who built it, the Great Sphinx is one of Egypt's most famous landmarks and is among the world's largest sculptures, measuring 240 feet long and 66 feet high. The sculpture includes a lion's body and a human head adorned with a royal headdress. While portrayed as an evil spirit in Greek mythology, Egyptian lore believed sphinxes to be guardians of sacred places. That is why builders also included figures of the creatures in tomb and temple complexes. For example, the so-called Sphinx Alley in Upper Egypt is a 2-mile avenue that connects the temples of Luxor and Karnak and is lined with small sphinx statues. Egyptian laborers who worked on the Great Sphinx carved it from a single piece of limestone. Pigment residue suggests that the laborers also painted the entirety of the Great Sphinx. By some estimates, it would have taken about 3 years for 100 workers using stone hammers and copper chisels to finish the statue. They also painted the body red and the face blue and gold, which would have made for a dazzling sight in the near-lunar landscape of Giza. The statue's laborers and painters, far from being slaves as often depicted in popular culture, regularly dined on luxurious cuts of prime beef, mutton, and goat meat, better food than they would have ever enjoyed back home. In these early days, Egyptians called the Sphinx the Great Khepre. The Great Sphinx, unfortunately, began to fade into the desert background towards the end of the Old Kingdom, and during the time of upheaval known as the First Intermediate Period, it would be covered by the desert sands and ignored for centuries. Yet inscriptions on a pink granite slab between the Great Sphinx's paws tell the story of how the statue was saved from the sands. Prince THUTMOSE, the son of King Amenhotep II, fell asleep near the Sphinx during a hunting trip, the story goes. In THUTMOSE's dream, the statue, calling itself Arm-Akhet and completely concealed beneath the desert sands, complained about its state of decay and offered the young prince the kingdom if he would clear the sand from the statue and restore it to its former glory. Whether or not the dream actually occurred is unknown, but when the prince did in fact become King Thutmose IV, he ordered the sand cleared from the Old Kingdom monument, by then built centuries in the past. Upon being restored, it became known as the Horus of the Horizon. King Thutmose IV also introduced a Sphinx worshipping cult to his subjects. Statues, paintings, and relief of the figure popped up across the country, and the Sphinx again became a symbol of royalty. For centuries, it served as a center of Egyptian religious life. Yet with the decline of the New Kingdom and a series of conquests by the Assyrians and the Persians, sands again covered the Sphinx. During this time, the Sphinx's body suffered the most erosion, but the face suffered the most visible damage, most famously its missing nose. Popular legend claims that cannon fire from Napoleon's army blew off the Sphinx's nose, but illustrations that date before Napoleon still depict a noseless Sphinx. Another theory argues that Muhammad Saim al-Dar, a Sufi Muslim, mutilated the statue during the 14th century to protest what he saw as idolatry. An angry mob supposedly murdered al-Dar soon afterwards. Whatever the case, the Sphinx became buried in sand up to its shoulders until the early 1800s, when a Genoese scholar named Giovanni Caviglia attempted, and ultimately failed, to dig out the statue with a team of 160 laborers. At least 2 more expeditions attempted to excavate the Sphinx during the 19th century. Yet it would not be until the 1930s that Egyptian archaeologist Salim Hassan finally freed the monument from its sandy tomb. During this latest restoration, the Great Sphinx lost part of its iconic headdress and suffered severe damage to the head and neck. Consequently, the Egyptian government employed a team of engineers to patch up the statue during the late 1930s. Unfortunately, these restorations wreaked havoc upon the soft limestone of the Great Sphinx, and in 1988, a 700-pound piece of the shoulder fell in front of a German reporter as he took photographs. Today, the Sphinx is continuing to deteriorate thanks to wind, humidity, and pollution. Restoration efforts have been ongoing since the mid-1900s, some of which ultimately caused more damage to the Sphinx. In 2007, authorities learned that the local water table under the statue rose because of sewage being dumped into a nearby canal. The moisture spread through the porous limestone of the Great Sphinx, which caused the rock to crumble. The authorities installed pumps close to the Great Sphinx, which diverted the groundwater and spared the monument further destruction. Today, it is still an object of fascination and, unsurprisingly, a magnet for outlandish speculation. Some today believe the Sphinx to be a power-harnessing machine that processes solar energy, a fantastic but unlikely conclusion. Others believe in a supposed alignment of the Sphinx, the pyramids, and the Nile River with the stars of the constellations Leo and Orion. Such claims are greeted with skepticism, not without reason, but a remarkable work like the Sphinx will always attract attention, speculation, and, fittingly enough, myth-making. That wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.